I'm about to probably tangle myself up in a million cords here. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you today. I know about the good work that this group has been doing and have just so much respect for everything that has come out of this group. I am anxious to talk with you about this and to hear your ideas as well as mine. When Yvonne called me and asked me if I could talk about this topic, I have to admit it stumped me for a few minutes. I've given hundreds of presentations on various topics, and I find this to be among one of the most challenging ones because there are no easy answers. So because of that, I want to invite you to be a participant in this discussion rather than a listener to a lecture. I promise no death by PowerPoint today. But I do invite your comments. I invite you to share your experience, bring your questions to light, and together we'll find our way through this. So who am I? I work at the University of Rochester Medical Center in the Department of Neurology with a team that is called the Neurology Supportive and Palliative Care Team. I can never say the name of that without clarifying that palliative has nothing to do with end of life in this instance. I got curious about it and looked it up to find out where that term came from. I was surprised to learn it comes from an Old English term for a cloak that one would wrap around them. And I kind of think of the services that are offered in that particular program as a wraparound group of services to support individuals who have chronic neurological conditions. The word chaplain is another word that is loaded with many meanings for many people. In the medical field, chaplains are people who support individuals in trying to figure out the meaning of what they're dealing with, trying to figure out the answers to those big existential questions of why me and how am I going to cope with this and what does this mean for my life. We do sometimes perform religious functions, but rarely. We normally call on clergy for that and are more likely to talk about those larger topics than we are to talk about things which are religious. So just a little clarification about the role of chaplains there, because most people don't know that. And in fact, I've walked into rooms in the hospital, introduced myself as a chaplain, and had people go like this. We don't want any. I have a few degrees along the way. I have a master's in divinity as well. I don't think any of them make any difference, really. The book learning has been important. I've learned a lot from it, but where I have really learned is from all of you. Everything I really know about how to live with Parkinson's disease has come from the patients and family members that I have been fortunate enough to walk this path with. So you are the experts today, and I want you to bring that expertise into our discussion. Okay? So what is Parkinson's disease? No, I'm not going to go into the basics anymore, but a few things just that I think need to be mentioned when we talk about what's enough. We have to talk about where we're starting from, and just the importance of recognizing that the experience of having Parkinson's disease is so different for each and every person. Each of you has had a unique experience coming here, and that experience is valid, it is important, it is yours, and important in answering the question of how much is enough. The unpredictability of symptoms, of course, is something that you're all more aware of than I am. Knowing how difficult it is to predict where things will go. Am I doing enough, or where are we going here along the way? What can I expect? And knowing that that is different for each and every person makes this a very, very hard question to answer. Incurable in the sense that it doesn't go away, but not incurable in the sense, I was having a conversation right before the meeting, and we were talking about the fact that just because one day is a bad day does not mean the next day is going to be a bad day. It is progressive in nature, as you well know, and obviously life-changing for everyone involved, not only the patient, but everyone who loves that person and cares about them and walks the path with them. So then the other part of that question is, what's enough? And you are enough. What you are doing is enough. And I think that's the place we have to start this conversation and the place that we have to end it, because the journeys are so individual, and each of us has our own limitations, our own ways of coping. We all have an exhaustible supply of energy, not an inexhaustible one. So yes, a starting place to remember is that what you're doing is enough. So let's take the facts first. The facts aren't nearly as interesting as some of the other things that we'll be talking about hopefully today, but let's take some of the facts. What do we know from research that is helpful with Parkinson's disease? Well, we know there are some medications that are helpful, right? With controlling symptoms, obviously. Regularly following up with a physician is helpful. Being safe, and avoiding falls is important. We know from multiple research studies that regular exercise is important. We know that physical therapy has positive benefits. We know that speech therapy has positive benefits. We know that adequate nutrition is important, mental health support is important, and care partner support is important. So that's one set of answers to, am I doing enough? Those are some of the things that we can kind of count on make a difference. I know many of you are involved in the Parkinson's boxing programs. Some of you in the dance program. I have a colleague who's starting a pickleball program for people with Parkinson's. There is the choir at Nazareth, if you don't know about it. Pickleball? Ping pong, right. Thank you for adding that one. So we know that there are lots and lots of opportunities for getting out. There is in Fairport now an accessible outdoor activity place that has bicycling and kayaking available. So lots of places to get exercise. So obviously that's an important thing. Are you doing enough? Anyone want to add to this list or comment on before I go by it in terms of just basic kinds of things? How do you know if you're doing enough? Well, this is from the literature, and it gives you some ideas about it. What doesn't help? A few lists there that I got from the literature of things that don't help particularly. You can read those along the way. One that is interesting to me is next to the last one, refusing the use of assisted equipment. We have a really unique cultural attitude towards assistive technologies, I think, in the United States that makes it really, really hard for people to make choices about what they will use and what they would prefer not to. I certainly have had people say to me, I do anything to avoid having to use a walker. But if a walker keeps you safe, obviously it's an important part of doing enough. People who will use a wheelchair because of the stigma attached to it. But a wheelchair can also be a way to go out and do things that you couldn't do otherwise. So I think these are things that we know from the literature don't particularly help, but I don't think that they're all inclusive. So again, anyone want to add to that at all? Okay, let's get into the good stuff. How do you know if you're doing enough? And I think that we have to make a division here between the person with Parkinson's, how does he or she know that they're doing enough, and the caregiver. I think the experiences are very different, and yet there are so many shared issues that we could talk about here. So I want to spend a little time talking about grief and loss. This is really probably one of the most important things for me to cover today from my perspective, and I really want you to chime in on this. We do not grieve only when someone dies. We grieve whenever we lose anything that is important. We grieve when our pet dies. I've grieved when I've lost a favorite piece of jewelry, or even an article of clothing that I especially liked that got ruined. But we grieve most deeply when we lose dreams. And this is an experience that I have found to be often a part of living with any chronic illness, but certainly a part of living with Parkinson's, because there are sequential losses with Parkinson's. It's not just one loss, but there's the loss of the job, there's the loss of the home sometimes, there's the loss of the ability to drive, there's the loss of the ability to do activities that you enjoyed doing, and on and on. So there's this constant process of readjusting and grieving. And I believe that both people with Parkinson's and their care partners go through this grief process. So everything that I ever learned about grief, I learned from a psychologist in Chicago, Illinois, who wrote a wonderful book that is probably out of print by now, but taught so many of us a way of looking at grief as a normal, natural process that you don't have to learn how to do. It's feeling focused. There are emotions that come with it, and it affects the patient and the caregiver both in different ways. So you may have seen or even studied yourself some of the models of grief that are out there, right? There's the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on Death and Dying that talks about the stages of grief. Some of you may have actually had that as a textbook when you were in school. I have two great slides. I didn't bring them today, but one says this is what grief is supposed to look like, and it has a nice, neat little diagram. And then I have another slide where somebody's taken a pencil and just dotted it all over the page, and it says what my grief looks like. I know that's what my grief looks like. Maybe yours as well. It's unpredictable. There may be days that you are very much in denial and wanting to stay there. Denial is a perfectly good place. Other days that you're angry, days that you're depressed, times that you're working hard at trying to bargain your way through this process. Whatever emotion you are experiencing is a valid emotion. I think that's one point I really want to leave you with. Denial, for example. Denial buys us time to gather the resources that we're going to need to deal with what's in front of us. Doctor comes in and tells you you have Parkinson's disease or your loved one has Parkinson's disease. Nobody hears a word after that. Our ears are non-functioning at that point. We need time. We need a buffer in there. There's a denial of fact. There's a denial of implication. I don't have Parkinson's. The doctor's wrong. Or I have it, but it's going to be fine. We're just going to get through this just fine. There might be a bump in the road, but it'll be good. Whatever it is legit and yours. The same thing with anger and depression. And we can throw anxiety in there as well. Common emotions that everyone has when they're dealing with loss. What will life be like? How will I cope with the differences that I'm going to experience? Where will the meaning come from in all of this? I think that we have to talk about grief in order to talk about quality of life and joy and awe and beauty and all of those kinds of things. To not do so is to kind of fall into a very Pollyannish point of view. And this is not a Pollyannish disease, obviously. It's a difficult challenge for everyone involved. So how do you acknowledge that and yet also acknowledge the potential for growth, the potential for experiences that are fulfilling, the potential for a really good quality of life? And that's what I want to talk about next, but I think we're at about the 35-minute mark. So is this a good time for a stretch break?
Anybody want to take a break? I'll give you a whole pass.
Nobody wants to take a break? Okay. What have your experiences been with the grief process? Is anybody willing to share? With coming to terms? Yes, sir.
I would say that I'm always, like you mentioned, looking for a way out. How do you fight your way out of this battle? What's the solution? And then you come to the realization that you're grieving because how many years of doctors and scientists been studying and we're still not quite there with therapy to stop the progression or possibly reverse it.
Yeah.
So I struggle with that.
And I think there's real loss in the fact that we haven't gotten further. Everyone's trying right now, but we don't have that magic bullet yet. And the lack of that is a source of grief. The lack of knowing that modern science has worked on this and hasn't yet solved it. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
You hear of something that's really great potential, but
Right.
they get caught up in government red tape and other ways of slowing it down
Yeah.
to get it to the patient.
And that up and down roller coaster of something good's coming along, oh, maybe it isn't, or maybe it is. That's a difficult one. Camille?
So as a caregiver, when I first heard the diagnosis, of course, I was looking into everything, and I was kind of in shock, I would say. And then, I was trying to find things that would make his life better, and so I did all that, and I guess that was part of a denial until I finally broke down and realized I really couldn't do much of anything, and that was a hard acceptance.
Yeah.
And so then from each stage that he's gone through, and then he had cancer in the middle of some of this,
Wow.
that, we get to a place and we're both doing pretty good, and then you kind of fall off that Parkinson's cliff into the next phase, and that just brings
starts all over again. The image of falling off the Parkinson's cliff, I think, is one that is profound. Something new hits, it's a new stage, it's a new period of time, it's a new set of challenges, and it's hard.
So it's interesting, the fact that the two of us talked about it with the cancer, we were much more accepting. There was all these possible cures, and there is like a great remission that he's in right now. And you also know, like, if there's a beginning and an end,
Mm-hmm.
the unpredictability of this.
Exactly. I think that summarizes beautifully what my experience has been with patients, that the comparison with cancer is often made, that it is a single event, a single loss. You adjust to it. I suppose people with cancer will probably tell me there are many stages of that, however, and I think that's probably true. But the unpredictability and the fact that eventually the symptoms will progress. How they'll progress, no one knows, but you know that they will, and that makes it really hard. Just a word about acceptance, as long as that just came up in Camille's comments. Again, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did wonderful work, but I think we kind of got stuck on a particular model with her, and acceptance was never, for her cancer patients, a point of standing and jumping up and down and going, yay, I've got cancer. She talked about acceptance as a place of yielding to the understanding that this was a part of your life experience, rather than in any way celebrating it. It's just acceptance is different for everyone, and what it means to accept having Parkinson's disease is something you have to tell me about, because I think it's very different for each and every person. I have seen patients that feel very defeated by it. I've seen patients who are going to fight every inch of the way, and everywhere in between. Does anybody else want to share their experience here? Yes, please.
I think the one thing that we are looking at is Parkinson's has always been considered an old age disease, not something that you get as a young person. Yet apparently more and more young people are being diagnosed with Parkinson's. Attributable to our lifestyle, care of our plants, how we take care of our water system. Somebody's got to pick up and do something. Try to get those people who are suffering from.
Completely agree with you, and maybe that's one of the ways of answering the question of, are you doing enough? Because enough may be advocacy too. Some of you may find energy or desire or interest in advocating for some of the factors that we suspect, I don't think we know yet, but that we suspect may be causes of Parkinson's disease. I'm so glad that you mentioned the aging issue.
To me, it's like, it's, we don't respect your elders anymore. Therefore, we get shoved to the side.
Well, it interests me a great deal for a slightly different reason, but I agree with you on the basic premise. Aging is a process of loss. And most people with Parkinson's are aging, right? So we've got kind of a double whammy there that's happening. If you go back to sociology classes and remember the stages of man, Erickson's model of the stages of man, he had a little task that we were to do at each stage. For example, the baby had to learn how to trust its environment before it could act on its environment. And it goes all the way up through adulthood, talking about these tasks that we have to accomplish. And it gets to old age, and he doesn't have a whole lot to say about it. But he says that it is a balance between being able to see life in its entirety from a perspective that we don't have when we're younger versus despair. Despair as we realize that life is ending. Some dreams will not be realized, some will. And there is loss as we begin to lose friends, lose family members, lose abilities. So I think you have to consider that when you talk about loss and grief and Parkinson's, because most people with Parkinson's are aging. The loss overlay each other and make it particularly challenging for both individuals with Parkinson's and for the care partners, who are also usually aging in one way or another. So just something to think about when you consider the whole grief process. Anyone else want to share kind of your experience with this grief process?